Womanjika, hello and welcome everyone to a sold-out High Life Expo. Thank you for joining the Electrify Everything session. I'm Sophie Tawney. I'm from Electrify Burundara and we're a community-led alliance dedicated to accelerating the energy transition. And we do that through informing and educating our community. So today we're meeting on Wurundjeri country, and Wurundjeri people have been living sustainably for tens of thousands of years and continue to model deep resilience. We are in the middle of National Reconciliation Week, and there are events happening all across Naarm, and it's a wonderful time to reflect on our history and embrace Indigenous wisdom. I'm thankful for the continued learning I get from the generosity of First Nations people. And I offer my respect to Wurundjeri elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people in the room. So we have a jam-packed program today, and this session particularly, we have a very full list of speakers and a very exciting topic. So we do want to make sure we have time for your questions. That's really important. So I'm going to introduce all our wonderful speakers now, and we'll have some rapid fire presentations and then we'll have question time. And if you see in the middle of the room, there's a microphone. So when it comes to Q&A, I would love it if you just line up at the microphone and I'll call on your questions then. So in this session, we are going to hear from Peter Steele, the Director of Goodbye Gas, Craig Harris, Principal of LID Consulting, Carla, Richard and Ying-Lan, who employed LID Consulting to develop a sustainability report for their building. And they're going to tell us how their electrification journey is going. And then lastly, we're going to hear from Andrew McKeegan, General Manager of Active Utilities, who has kindly sponsored this session. Peter.
Sure that one does what I think it does. Great. Thanks, Sophie. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. I'm genuinely very excited to be here. And I think just the sheer level of interest in this event for me is a really great sign. I think even thinking back a few years ago, I don't think you could have necessarily pulled off an event like this with the level of interest and oversubscription of the registrations that has been achieved. And so, I think it's a positive sign. And I also do want to shout out the team that have pulled this together have worked overtime to make it happen. So I think it's the Let Me Be Frank team in particular. Congratulations to them in getting this all together and looking so wonderful. I work for a company called Goodbye Gas. It does what it says on the tin. We help people to take their homes off gas. So we set the business up a couple of years ago, recognising that the process of degasifying your home can be quite complicated technically in terms of understanding what products are the right fit, how to make good product choices. And then ultimately finding trades to do the work and coordinating those trades in a way that ends up with the right installation and commissioning of those products, and as little disturbance as possible to the day-to-day life of that household. So today I'm here to have a chat a little bit about our work in general, but in I guess the specific case of townhouses, apartments, and I guess the typology that this event is focused on. I try to keep these numbers in my head because I think it's worth recognising what's ahead of us in terms of the challenge. So there's about 5 million homes in Australia that need to get off gas. And if we want to be sort of aligning ourselves with carbon targets and science-based information around what we need to do in decarbonising our energy system, we need to do that really quickly. And that, again, for round numbers, my poor little brain can't handle anything more sophisticated than this. That equates to something like 500,000 homes a year, every year for 10 years, which is an enormous challenge. I don't want to sort of sugarcoat that. There's a lot of work to do. Just for comparison, our best ever year in rooftop solar, which is a very, very mature industry at this point, is about 400,000 installs in 1 year. So we're talking about doing more than that every year for 10 years. And so there's a huge industry capacity that has to be brought to bear here. And I think it's useful to bear this in mind because I think it helps us to understand what we need to ask government for and what we need to be looking for as policy and regulatory levers to make it happen. The really interesting thing about electrification as a sort of a trend is that it's being led by customers. So people are deciding to do this in their own homes for a variety of reasons. We've got governments following now as they want to do. Once they see that something is already happening, they're not always the leader, but they're quite often the follower. And the great thing is that people are choosing to do this. They're putting their own money on the line, and they're making it happen. We see in our day-to-day interactions with customers that people are motivated by huge concerns about climate change. It's a pretty obvious one, but people realise the pretty dire situation we're in. They want to do something, and their own home is the closest, I guess, lever for them to pull. And so we see a lot of people making the decision, really driven by their concerns about the planet and climate change in particular. The close second and maybe equal first is their wallet. So, everyone's aware that interest rates have gone up a lot, cost of living's gone up a lot, and we see people arriving to us, particularly when they get their first heating gas bill of the season, and they don't want to get another $1,200 bill from their gas company. And so it's part of them being able to take control over their utility costs. And in the process, there's often a dual motivation that's coupled with their concern about the environment and ultimately health. So we've seen a really significant increase in the number of customers talking to us about health concerns. Asthma Australia published some pretty terrifying research last year around the links between gas use in the home and childhood asthma rates. And so there's a lot of people who have recognised that this thing that we were told was clean and natural is actually potentially not a great thing to be setting fire to in your own home to boil some water or to heat your home. So those motivations are there. We know we've got a big job to do, but there's something holding us back. There's a series of things that make this difficult. In varying ways, and in the context of today's expo and what we're focused on, particularly in apartment buildings and strata communities. So the upfront cost is a barrier. It's particularly a barrier when you're taking the whole of society into consideration, not just privileged people like me that might have the income and the available capital or means to borrow capital to make it happen in my home, for example. So that's a really big challenge, and I think it's worth confronting that challenge. There's no silver bullet for that one. There are a bunch of levers I think that are available to governments. There's innovation in the private sector that I think will help as well, but ultimately it is a challenge. Complexity is what we as a business have sort of set out to try to solve as best we can and make our contribution to solving that. So you decide you want to get a heat pump from your home or take your cooking from being a gas cooktop to an induction cooktop. You jump on the internet, you start reading things, and it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed quite quickly. So I think that complexity is holding a lot of people back, and certainly our discussions with customers often start with, I've been wanting to do this for 2 years, but I just didn't really know where to start, or I got worried about making the wrong decision about the product or the trade that was going to install that product, and so I kind of just didn't get started and have been sitting there not finding enough time to research on the weekends or in the evening, or just finding things so overwhelming that I didn't do anything. Industry capacity, as I mentioned earlier, is a challenge as well, and I think there's a lot of work to do to bring to bear, I guess, the skills and training that we need. Again, to come back to 500,000 retrofits a year needs a workforce, needs an entire industry to support it. So electrifying strata buildings is challenging. I don't want to sort of come in here and say that it's easy, because in a lot of cases it is just far more complex than an individual home or a townhouse. So we, as a business, our focus has predominantly been on helping individual, detached dwellings and semi-detached dwellings to electrify. But we have had some experience with apartments, and so I wanted to just share a little bit about that today. This is a project that we worked with a developer called Milieu and them in partnership with Breathe Architecture and a great consultant team. At the outset, I want to state that one of the biggest complexities for apartment buildings is the fact that there are multiple owners. This apartment building had a single owner, so that side of things was immediately eliminated as a challenge. And so I don't want to pretend that this is a model for every apartment building, because obviously it's a relatively unusual circumstance. This was an adaptive reuse, essentially, of a I think 60s or 70s built motel that was converted into 17 individual apartments. And our work involved really assessing what the options were to electrify this building. So that was to remove the gas cooking and gas central hot water system, and to work into understanding how that would interact with things like the existing electrical supply, so the main supply from the network, and ensuring that was adequate to service the building once it fuel switched across entirely to electric. The end solution was I think 4 heat pumps and buffer tanks for a centralised solution. So essentially the plumbing arrangement was able to stay the same, and there was space in this circumstance, which again there's not always in a strata building. There was space for that plant to be located, and it didn't present challenges to loads on a rooftop or any of that sort of thing from a structural perspective. Individually in the apartments, we saw, we implemented induction cooktops and electric ovens, and all of that was able to be completed within the existing main supply available to the building. So I've chosen, probably cheating, a really easy example, but I guess for me the takeaways we've taken from this is really that this is where I think there's the potential to start at scale in this lower rise, smaller apartment communities. There's enormous scope to just kind of get on and do the job. We do need to figure out solutions to larger buildings, and there's lots and lots of very smart people thinking about that. But in the meantime, in terms of individual action, where we're talking about owners of these sorts of apartments, there is things that I guess to get on with and do, and that's I think really encouraging. I know I'm very close to my time. I just wanted to maybe leave you on this, because as I said, we've done some work in apartments, but we've learned a lot from that. But we also are combining that with our experience of working with individual homeowners in other typologies. So I think there's a very obvious one but it is particularly important in apartment buildings that the solution needs to be specific to the circumstances. There's not really a cookie cutter template that's available to apartment buildings because there's such a broad variety of factors at play. And so having a plan that's specific to that building is the first step. What we see, and I guess our interest in working with individuals, is to find that balance between recognising the complexity of shared ownership and shared servicing, but also not holding individuals back from making small changes in their own apartment that might be possible from day one. So that could be induction cooktop replacement of a gas stove. What's required though is something that sits across that, a master plan for electrifying that building that enables that individual action to get going, someone to get started to make their own investment in their own apartment, but also recognises that there's a shared journey that might be a longer journey to look at the shared infrastructure, the central systems, and make sure that individual action doesn't also impair the ability for the whole building to electrify over time. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. And as Sophie indicated, my name's Craig Harris. I'm from Lower Impact Development LID Consulting. One of the interesting things is that Peter started talking about a lot of my talk, which is great because we, in a good way actually, we overlap. And what Peter said at the end there was that what you really need is a master plan. We've started dealing in the space of looking at getting a master plan together for apartment buildings and gathering the data that allows us to work out what's specific about your particular apartment building and preparing master plans for apartment buildings to enable the getting off gas and the incorporation of other sustainable technologies. So that's where I'm coming from today, and that's what I'm talking about. But just a little bit more about myself. I am the principal of a sustainability consultancy, Low Impact Development, LID Consulting. We've been around for 15 years. We've done a lot of work in the new build space, helping architects and designers produce more sustainable buildings across the full gamut of building types. We've done apartments, townhouses, childcare centres, schools, office buildings, warehouses, the whole lot. We're now doing some work in in existing builds as well, having recently completed a project at Haynes Street with the next guys who are going to speak. So I won't talk too much about Haynes Street. They'll talk about Haynes Street. We've also done some policy work in the past. We did write the Marybeck Council EV and PV guidelines that informed their town planning amendment. So we had some good work there. And prior to LID Consulting, I was a project manager and a construction manager in the construction industry for 17 years. So there's a fair depth of knowledge and work we've done in sustainable buildings over the years. But I'm here today to talk about apartment retrofit plans. That's what we're calling our master plan product. And the goal of the apartment retrofit plan, as we've been alluding to here, is obviously to get new technologies in play, to lower your energy bills, to lower your emissions and get more comfortable spaces. So we see that the master plan is the path to getting people on the road to that. It's not a fast journey, as Peter indicated. There's a lot of work involved and there is various amounts of expense at different stages to get to the end, but it's a good process and worth being on the process. We think apartment retrofit plans are going to be attractive to individuals who may want to cluster together and find out what could we do in our apartment building, or they may be of interest to owners corporation managers who on behalf of the lot owners, they want to work out what can we do with our building. So yeah, there's a whole lot of tips and advice that we include in these reports, so hopefully they do prove to be of interest. The sorts of technologies we talk about, it's a little bit more than just getting off gas and going all electric. We talk about, in the apartment retrofit plan, it talks about ways to increase your recycling and reduce your waste, which basically is a way of lowering your carbon emissions in your building. We talk about improving glazing, improving insulation, and the building fabric as well. So work on the building fabric, work on the services, work on your waste, and a whole lot of... It's sort of trying to be the full gamut of how do you reduce the emissions of your lifestyle. As Peter indicated, there are challenges in apartment buildings, and we know that work in apartment buildings often involves a lot of group decisions. There'll be some opportunities to do your own work, but there'll be many of the other decisions require group work, or group decisions. And the people making the decisions in apartment buildings, there's different stakeholders and they have different goals. So that creates the challenge. What we're trying to do with our apartment master plan, our apartment retrofit plan, is we're trying to get all the stakeholders on the same page. Other challenges that we are aware of are that it's very hard sometimes. There'll be a lot of people, cost is a factor, and when you're replacing a service from a hot water service that supplies hot water, and you want to change it over to an electric hot water service that supplies hot water, there's going to be a lot of people in apartments that aren't committed to that changeover. They're not getting a different service, but yet they're expected to spend a certain amount of money. So that's always going to be a challenge. As I said earlier, it's potentially significant expenses when you add up all the measures that we want to do in the whole program. And there's alternative options for spending your money on too. We all know that in a building there's a certain amount of expense needs to be spent each year on maintenance, and you may want to spend money on lifts in walk-up apartments, for example, when that's a really viable sort of valid reason or location to spend your money. So spending your money on sustainability is not the only need or demand in a building to make sure that it's a good lifestyle in the building. Obviously people want to have different options for spending their money as well. So a solution needs to basically demonstrate the benefits that are clear to all, and it needs to merge the goals of all the different parties. Our process and benefits are basically to, number one, ask the right questions and collect the relevant data. So we've got quite an extensive survey that we'll send to the people who engage us and get all the data that we need to. We speak to the trades if we're engaged to do so. We provide an explanation of the specifics of your building and provide tailored recommendations. The plan provides clear, consistent information to all stakeholders. This is the benefits. We provide the what and the why, so that when you're talking to other lot owners, they've all got the same information as yourself, and you can be, there's not a gap in the information, which is important. It also provides direction over a long period. When people buy and sell their lots, you really want the new owners to come on board and be able to quickly come up to speed with what's going on, what's the plan for the apartment building. So that's the value, that as people sell in and buy in and sell out, you can still maintain the continuity of the plan throughout the life of the process. And it's really important to avoid wasteful infrastructure work. If you don't have a plan and you don't realise that you want to go all electric and your hot water carks at one night, you're going to ring up the plumber, and the plumber will say the easiest thing to do is just put another gas. If you've got a gas hot water service, the plumber will say the easiest thing to do is to get another gas hot water service in there. So unless the person is aware that we do have a plan to go all electric, they would probably go down the path of just letting the plumber put the gas hot water service back in again, and you've got fossil fuel burning infrastructure for another 15 years in your apartment building that you may not want to change. And that's assuming it's an individual hot water service within your own apartment, but it obviously could be a communal one as well. What we're planning on doing, what we're trying to do with our plan, is to make sure that we can identify things that you can do individually now, and the high priority items. We're trying to identify individual things you can do yourself without requiring the help of the other, or decision from the other owners, maybe a little bit further down the track. Identify common area measures that can happen ASAP, or just can be decisions that can be made by the keen people, the people that really want to make the decision. And we also identify the longer term common area decisions that everybody needs to make together. But there is the hope that as we progress, you pick the easy fruit, the low-hanging fruit first, you get things done, people start to see the benefit of what's going on with the changes, and it gets easier to make the bigger decisions at the end. And just to finish up with today, I thought I'd talk about the sort of the two big impact items I see. And the first one is an individual decision. It's, in Victoria, 60% of our energy consumed in the homes goes to heating and cooling spaces. So if you want to have the biggest impact on lowering your emissions, you want to get rid of a fossil fuel source and get onto a renewable source as soon as you can. The best way to do that is to change over to reverse cycle air conditioner heat pump units. So you may have heard the term heat pump units quite a lot now. It's becoming much more common. We've always talked about reverse cycle air conditioners as a reverse cycle air conditioner. It's actually a heat pump as well. They work very well in reverse in obviously heating spaces. They're also very, very efficient. They have what's called a coefficient of performance, and they basically, it allows you to take 1 unit of energy, can produce between 3 to 4 units of heat energy, which sounds amazing and sounds like magic, but it actually does happen with the action of refrigerants and compressors and things. If you take 1 unit of gas, it'll produce about 0.7 or 0.8 units of heat. So it's never fully efficient with gas. It's more than efficient with your electric units, and that's why they're so cheap to run. So that's a really big change. And if you're powering your dwelling from a renewable source, then if you change over to getting 100% renewable energy into your house, and you've got a electric reverse cycle heat pump unit, you can cut your emissions by 60% straight away. So that's the really big ticket item. The other big ticket item is not as easy to do, but it's certainly, not that hard actually. It's understanding, it's not hard to work out what the electrical capacity is of your building. That's really something that needs to be done, because all decisions in terms of going all electric hinge about the process of going, of understanding what the electrical capacity is of your building. So that's a really important thing to get done up front. Making the change and upgrading your capacity is a little bit harder later on, but certainly understanding what your capacity needs to be is important. So that's the end of my talk. I just wanted to say, if anyone is interested in our apartment retrofit plan, and then just have a look at the QR code there. That'll take you to our website. There'll be a form there that you can fill out clicking on a button there, fill out a form and contact us. We'll contact you back for a chat and talk through the process and talk through the fees or the scope that you might want to agree on, because there's multiple scopes that you can choose. So that's our process. We'll get back to you and then we'll take it from there. But thanks very much, everyone.
Good morning. Nice to see a big turnout here. I'm looking forward to some good questions from all sorts of people and answers, some answers. My name is Carla Campbell-Riddle. I'm the chair of the OC of 61 and 61A Haynes Street, and I've been had the privilege of being the chair for the last 6 years. Together with my fellow committee members, Ying-Lan Dan and Richard Keble, we will be sharing our story about the work we've done over the last 6 years to understand how to future-proof the community of owners and residents and our building sustainability. But first, a little bit about our OC. Ours is one of 5 identical blocks on Haynes Street, with a precinct of similar buildings designed by Roy Grounds of the Arts Centre fame, John Mockridge and Peter McIntyre. Approximately 500 apartments within 4 blocks. And the first residents moved in 1963. Pretty, eh? The buildings are a classic example of what's now known as mid-century modern. Double brick, single glazed, undercroft parking, and in the 60s, gas was the primary fuel for cooking, space heating and water heating. Our OC includes 33 units, 9 3-bedroom, 24 2-bedroom apartments, and spread across 4 buildings. 3 of the buildings are crowned by rooftop drying spaces for laundry. The car parks are open, no gates, no fences, and not all units have car parks. There are 2 small 1 by 3 metre communal storage rooms, plus 2 gas meter rooms, 2 electric meter rooms. At the time of construction and until 2020, asphalt covered almost all of the ground, courtyard, driveway area. Garden space was limited to small ornamental garden beds along Haynes Street, one on Abbotsford Street, and one behind in 61A Haynes Street South building adjacent to the car parks behind O'Shaughnessy Street apartments. In 2016, the Owners Corporation were informed that the electrical power to the building could be compromised if units were allowed to install modern appliances, such as air conditioning, drawing more than 25 amps. As a consequence, the OC introduced a special rule stipulating no more than 1 aircon per apartment. In 2018, a demographic shift in the owners created a desire for a car park space to be better used to enable social use, especially for the children. We have families with all sorts of children at various ages. The OC successfully applied for matched City of Melbourne urban forest funding, and we were able to add additional garden space, permeable paving and seating added, which improved social interaction, reduced car speeds and improved the environmental sustainability design. By 2020, we had succeeded in managing $130K worth of improvement to our shared open space. New owners regularly comment that the ground improvements made these blocks more attractive to buy than others. This prompted the owners and members of the OC to start thinking about whether solar could be an option for our building. In 2018, thinking broadened to how to make our shared environment more human-friendly. In 2019, we started to think about how could we get some help with working this out together, because it's not it's a very complicated thing, as others have alluded to, in a building that's 60 years old, not designed for any of the world. It's designed for gas and a teeny tiny dribble of electricity. So in 2023, as mentioned earlier, we commissioned LID, Craig, to help us provide a blue sky version of what was possible with our buildings or what could be conceived. And then solar became available. So now, having set the scene, I am going to hand over to Richard to take you through some more of the technical details.
So the goals of the goals of the OC to transform our apartments is to make the flats as sustainable as possible. That's sustainable from the point of view of environment, running costs, and also being able to get appliances in the future, given that gas is something that's being phased out. We want flats to be 100% electric if the owners want, but no owner would be compelled to move off gas if they didn't want that. We also want to get some communal solar happening. Out of Craig's report, he made quite a few recommendations. They include things like insulation. This is hard to do in a 1963 building, but you can improve it by doing things like double glazing, controlling drafts. But when it comes to doing things like insulating a double brick building, you've actually got to consider other things like moisture control, and we need to get advice on doing things like that. And also blocking up internal vents. If you've still got gas appliances, you can't block up all of your internal vents. That's actually quite a dangerous thing to do. As Carla said, that the building was built for gas for heating, cooking and hot water. It only has enough electricity to supply a 1963's small residence worth of electricity. That means flats can't go all electric as things are. We don't have enough electricity coming in from the street from Powercor's network. We don't have adequate meter room to flat connection to support the amount of electricity for all electric flats, and there is actually an overload risk as owners install more large electric appliances. We risk blackouts in the entire block if we don't get this right. Powercor wants over $4,000 up front to tell us whether or not we can upgrade our power supply from the street. And that has to be done by a person with suitable qualifications. So that's an additional charge there. So we're looking at around about $5,500 just to ask the question of, can we have more electricity from the street? Right now, that really limits our ability to move to all electric. Given that we've got a 25 amp per flat limit on how much power we can have in each of our flats, and this is a real thing that we have, and it's embedded in Owners Corporation rules, means that we can't have induction cooktops in the flats. Not possible. You need about 32 amps for those. What we're seeing is that flats that have had gas heating removed by previous landlords but haven't had heat pump air conditioning installed are overloading their internal switchboards and constantly blowing fuses or triggering circuit breakers. So we need a project to monitor power use to assess our current state and specify a new system and bring our internal electrical capacity up to what we need for all electric flats. We've also got additional difficulties. Hot water is really hard. The flats were designed with continuous hot water services for each individual flat. They all sit in our kitchens, underneath our kitchen benches, and they have specific apertures in the brickwork to allow this to work. That's where the hot water system has to go. If we want to upgrade to communal hot water heat pumps, that's a huge project. We need to duplicate all of our water plumbing, we need to deal with metering, we need to deal with billing for the hot water service, and we have to find a place for the hot water services to go. Can we put them on the roof? Well, 1,000 litres of water weighs a tonne. I'm not sure that we can actually put a tonne of water on our roofs. That means that we've got to find somewhere else in the block, and we're not sure that we've got those locations. We've also got to consider things like car charging. We need to learn how to do this. Not all flats have car spaces, but all flats would be paying for solar panels. How do we make sure that the flats with no dedicated car spaces get benefits from solar electricity for charging EV vehicles? This is all very new stuff, and it's all stuff that we're having to learn. One of the problems that we have is that we haven't encountered a one-stop place that will let us assess and design, finance and project manage this sort of project. We feel that we're very much on the bleeding edge of having to do this, and we're doing this as Owners Corporation Committee members. We're not getting paid for this, and we reckon we've spent over 1,000 hours of our own time, unpaid, trying to make this to happen. Now I'll pass you on to Ying, who is going to finish up for us.
Thanks, guys. So where are we now with the project? So taking on board advice from Craig, we sort of thought about, if we go back to this term, what are the low-hanging fruit? For us, solar panels seem to be pretty immediate. And really coincidentally, not long after we received the report from LID, the Solar Vic grants came up. So we've recently gone through the initial approval phase, so we are currently in the conditional approval phase. What we need to do now, obviously, is get 75% of our owners on board, and obviously taking into account a lot of the things, the strategies that Craig has used to bring on board landlords. Easier said than done. We have had initial meetings with many of our neighbours. Even to go to that initial approval, or an initial application, we did meet with a bunch of owners, because we thought if they're not on board, we're not going to pursue it. We have pursued it. We've gotten to this point. But we still look at the costs, so 1,500 for meter board upgrades per unit, 2,800 obviously coming from Solar Vic, 2,500 per unit. So, for us, for those of us who have the money to expend, it's very, very reasonable. There are many of our owners who don't and can't come up with that. And then landlords, it's another discussion altogether. So this is where we're kind of currently. The idea with Solar Vic is that you're able to pay it back, or that you're able to demonstrate within 10 years that you've made this money back. But the point is, how do you get it over the line in the first place? And that's sort of one of the reasons we wanted to speak with everyone today, to come up with some of these questions. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name's Andrew McMeekin. I work for Active Utilities. We're a provider of what we call local utility networks. So we do what you may know as embedded networks, centralised hot water, air conditioning, and so on and so forth. So interestingly enough, we've been around a long time. We look after about 90,000 meter points around the country. So we are the largest independent provider of these services, and that's important. Our focus is very, very much on providing the benefit of these services to your buildings. So whilst we may act as a retailer and those sorts of things, we do so for a fee with the value of the network returning back to the building. So both Craig and Pete, and certainly the team, and yours is a tough one. Sorry, but it is. So the challenge for those of you who live in larger buildings, if you have centralised hot water services, it is certainly possible for somebody to investigate replacing your hot water service with a heat pump. If you're already being billed for it, it's quite easy to consider the maths associated with, can somebody contribute $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to install the heat pump and recover that cost for you over the billing of the hot water. If you're already paying for hot water, you don't want your residents to pay for any more. So there's a whole bunch of challenges that are attached to that. These are the sorts of challenges we solve. Harder in smaller buildings of your nature, particularly where power supply is a really important thing. Your building will only have an available amount of power. Beyond that, to their point, put in one extra appliance, the whole building goes down. So there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done to pull away from gas, but it is entirely possible to transfer from gas to heat pump. Now, they're bigger, they're heavier, 1,000 litres of water is a tonne. You've got 400 apartments, that's 50 tonnes you're putting on the roof. Can it afford that weight? There's a whole bunch of stuff to do. We're not a full service consultants in that point of view, but we do help you along that path, working with Craig. We've worked together before in the past, and it's good to meet Pete today as well. So this is what your buildings will face. Move away from gas, install EV charging, look at, oh, sorry about the E dropping off storage. How do you put solar on, and what is your potential in the future to add batteries? If you're going to do EV charging to the point you need solar on the roof, have you got enough space on the roof? How do you fit that into your network if you've already got condensers and heat pumps and all sorts of other things sitting on the roof? And you're in a tower, how do you fit that in? What are the, does your sub have enough power and so forth? One of the advantages, and I don't know if anybody here lives in an electrical embedded network, one of the advantages to a building of an electrical embedded network is that your infrastructure is designed specifically for this energy transition. So whilst it may be that you're not being operated in the way that you would like as owners of the building, and if you're not, then come talk to Marzina, who's standing on the side, or myself, or any of us sitting out there. There are better ways to run your building if it is an embedded network. But as an electrical infrastructure solution to electrification and the energy transition, embedded networks are absolutely perfect for it. So I'd like to thank the team for inviting us to sponsor. Working with people like Craig and Pete is a really, really good thing to do, but we can sit in the background and provide that sort of resource and assistance you may need to work out how you're going to fund it and how it works electrically. We are registered electrical contractors, so we do understand power supply and all of those sorts of things. But yeah, thank you very much to everybody for having us. We'll be sitting down here, but also Marzina and I are out in the sponsors hall if you'd like to have a chat.
I don't know who can answer the question. With heat pumps, the problem you've got is that under a certain temperature, they don't work. So if you're going heat pump, what are you going to do about it when the temperature gets down to like 1 degree and lower? They don't work because they work on heat transfer and they can't transfer the heat. So what happens then? Because you lose your heating.
So are you in an apartment building?
That's irrelevant.
No,
If you're putting in recycle air conditioning, they only work down to a certain temperature, right? So once they get below that temperature, they don't work for heating.
So indeed correct. So heat pump efficiency is designed about the ambient air temperature outside. So,
when it's -1, what are you going to do?
So essentially that's why the heat pump construction in larger buildings contains a series of storage tanks. So it holds the water at a higher temperature and requires the heat pump to work less hard to bring it up to, say, a 65-degree delivery point so that you continue to get a hot water. So the entire design of the structure is such as to understand that, particularly if you live in Victoria, because they work beautifully in Queensland, but if you live in Victoria, it needs to be outside and the ambient temperature is lower. That's why you've got much larger percentage of storage tanks attached to your heat pump solution.
That's fine for your hot water, but I'm talking about heating your house.
In terms of an individual home?
You've got your reverse cycle air conditioner. That's the only heating source that you've got, right? Because everybody's swapped over. And it gets down to 1 degree outside and lower, and they stop working.
Well, I'm not going to be pretending to be a heat pump engineer, but I do know there's horses for courses, and essentially there are products out there that do work in sub-zero temperatures.
I thought today was about learning and understanding.
Sure.
So far at the moment, all I've learnt from what I've heard is pitching from the companies that you work at. So to answer the questions, are we going to have people around here so that when you are looking at going heat pump solely for heating your house, that's going to be resolved? How do you do it?
I'm not an electrical engineer or a mechanic or electrician, but if you insulate your house well, if you have a passive house, standard house, there's very little energy required to heat the house. Similarly, if your house is not being heated properly, sufficiently by reverse cycle heat pump heating and cooling, space heating and cooling units, you need to work on the insulation of your house and seal up the leaks, and that will make a very big difference in terms of making that unit work. So I don't know about the 1 degree outside, but if you've got a well-sealed house that's passively designed and takes heat during the day and stays warm at night time, you're not really heating it up from 1 degree up to sort of the comfort level of 22 degrees. You're probably heating it from 17 or 18 degrees up to 22 degrees, and that's not that difficult to do. And one other thing I'd say is that I was sceptical originally about about reverse cycle air conditioner / heat pump units, which is, as I said, a reverse cycle air conditioner is a heat pump unit. So that's the thing. Don't get worried about the heat pump discussion is actually a reverse cycle air conditioner. I'm just sort of clarifying that to everyone. One of the things I found is we were trying our reverse cycle air conditioner heat pump to heat our house, and it wasn't working that well. Then I opened it up and cleaned out all the dust and muck on it and found out that it works so much better once I'd done that. And I would recommend everyone should at least clean it annually. But I think probably if it ends up being dusty by the time that you know, when you open it up after every year and you find there's dust in there, then you should probably be cleaning it every 6 months. So horses for courses, how often you operate it, how dusty the environment is. But there's a massive difference if you clean the filters, and they're very easy to clean, but clean them at least once a year and clean them more regularly if they get dirty. But we found we've got a unit down the beach, a 2-bedroom unit with no insulation in it. It's got a heat pump unit, and it heats the space really well. So I don't have a problem with it. With my experience, that's not operating at 1 degree.
Well.
Thank you. I think probably a really good opportunity for you is to talk in the suppliers showcase. There's quite a lot of stallholders there who'll be able to answer some of your
The other one was
questions.
solar, because if you're living in an apartment in the city and you put up your solar panel on your roof, then the next door neighbour comes along and they build up a nice big tower and your solar panel stops working. Is there going to be like somewhere you can go to that you can invest in some other project, like another wind power that helps you subsidise your wind power?
I think, sir, we've got quite a few questions coming, so we'll come back to your questions at the end if there's time. Thank you. Can I just suggest you talk right into the microphone when you ask your question?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hopefully this is all right. I'm chairman of a body corporate in the city, 8 stories, 60 apartments, and I'm very sympathetic to our friends trying to get people to agree on things. We have successfully got them to agree on EV charging. We've rolled that out. And it was really an observation when you were talking about some of the different things. One of the problems we have at the moment is individual hot water systems in apartments that fail and flood. And what we're now getting is insurance claims where our insurance excess is $10,000. So apartment owners, if your hot water system causes the flood, you're up for the $10,000 excess. So what we're looking at now is whether we can use that as an incentive to get people to centralise hot water systems. So it's really an observation more than anything else, knowing how hard it is to get people to change. If you think you might get a $10,000 bill, all of a sudden you're more keen.
That's an interesting observation. We, for the most part, don't have storage hot water systems. They're continuous hot water systems, so it's much less likely to create a flood of however many litres of hot water are in the system.
Yeah, sorry, I really meant centralised hot water. Yeah.
So ours don't hold a whole lot of hot water. It means that you've actually broken your plumbing pipe in our case. One of our difficulties is actually finding something that will fit in the space that we currently have. Our architecture really constrains us in this respect because the plumbing comes from outside the flat almost directly into the hot water service, which means that if you want to put your hot water service somewhere else in your physical flat, you've got to reroute plumbing in the flat. So that's one of the difficulties that we have.
Yeah, I guess the other bonus we'd get, we've actually got a spot that might be feasible, we think. The other bonus we've got is everyone's got a hot water cupboard in our one, so they would get a free cupboard.
We love that. We've got another question. Thank you for your question, sir.
Thank you all. It was so interesting to hear from you, particularly the three of you from the Haynes Street property. I noticed in your presentation you mentioned the lack of a one-stop shop that can kind of support you for this full journey that you're on, and the point around the financing piece. So it's really exciting that there's government subsidies coming through with Solar Vic at the moment, but clearly a lot of additional upgrades that you need to make and different situations for residents about what they might be able to afford up front. Just curious about whether you've looked at financing options from banks or other lenders and what your experience with that has been like.
Really good question, really pertinent to us. All the grants in the world, if they're paid after you have to expense the funds, are kind of a cart before the horse, really. We haven't yet approached directly, and we have, we have a maintenance fund that covers for our day-to-day, and with a 60-year-old building, that's something in its own right. How to bring, we first need to get our owners on board, and that one of the financing is one of the big issues. So putting it out there. If someone has access or answers to that question, that's a big one for all of us.
And it's worth considering orders of magnitude of costs as well. After we received our report from Craig, one of the difficulties is actually costing a lot of this stuff. To actually do the cost for installing the plumbing for a communal hot water system, for example, is actually a hard thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, and it wasn't costed. I did very, very rough back of the envelope costs to work out how much it would cost the block if we were to do everything that was recommended in Craig's report, and it came in at around about $1 million. And there is no way our owners corporation could A, afford it, and therefore B, agree to it, if we were to do it in one hit. We're looking at a 10-year time frame to actually do what it is that we'd like to do. We're also hoping that maybe in that 10 years we'll see different technologies come along that might solve some of the more difficult problems, difficult technical problems that we have.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you for the question. Next question.
Mainly for the Hayne Street audience, hopefully you can hear me. You spoke about the rooftop of your buildings predominantly being clotheslines, laundries, things like that. Is that the plan of where your solar would go if it were to come, or is there just no capability for that?
Thanks for the question. So there are four buildings. One of them is a bridge, and so that shares clothesline. But basically, the clotheslines are about 20 square metres, which leaves another 80% of roof space. All of the roofs are north-facing, fully actually. There's tons of sunlight. In answer to the question before about towers potentially going up, I mean that's a question that's going to arise wherever. You know, it's about site specificity. In our case, it's a prime spot for solar. It's just the complexity of all of the things we've discussed. Exactly. There's no inbuilt question there. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question.
Two questions. The first is, what incentives are available now for people changing their situation from federal, state and local government, particularly since Burundara's providing or hosting this, what Burundara has done or is doing or intended to. I'm in the CBD, and the Melbourne City Council is encouraging a lot of waste work or work on waste with pilot studies, which our building has been involved in, and so that's particularly productive. We're now down to decomposting kitchen waste. So that's the first question, what is available now and what would be good to be available in the future. The second question is probably more for Burundara and others, is how do we manage to make group decisions when we require 75% approval of all the residents? In our case, a fair few of the owners are overseas, and so it's difficult. We have managed to get one change, but 75% is a big ask when you've got to do things, well, you think you have to do things for the benefit of people now and into the future.
One thing I will say is there's a lot of questions to answer in that, but I'll pick the easy one first. In terms of the 75%, that is a big one. One of the things I notice is that in New South Wales there's a difference for solar and this electrification story. The government there has reduced it from a 75% vote requirement to a 67%, so that has some benefit, but it is definitely a challenge as it is for everyone. As for what other councils and perhaps Burundara can do, or other people?
I'm not council. We're Electrify Burundara.
No,
we're a volunteer community alliance who are based in Burundara. But I know there's a couple of councils out there, so definitely worth having the discussion with them. But do you know anything about the federal subsidies as well? If anyone can talk to that, that would be very handy.
In terms of rebates and incentives, there's quite a few and lots of acronyms basically to get your head around. So in no particular order, there's STCs. They're generated certificates by certain activities. Solar's the most obvious one, but installing a heat pump, for example, also generates STCs. Those certificates have a value, and essentially whoever's providing that system to you will realise that value and take it off the bill, basically. Then in Victoria, there's VEECs. So that's part of the Victorian Energy Upgrade Program. Again, a certificate program, again, based on the activity and then the specific number of certificates generated by a product that you're installing, that becomes a credit or a rebate applied to your bill. In the sense of the upfront cost of installing and supplying and installing that equipment. And then Solar Victoria has a variety of things. There's a zero interest battery loan. There's a means tested heat pump subsidy of $1,000. And what am I forgetting there? There's obviously the solar incentive from Solar Victoria as well. I don't know if anyone's got anything that I've forgotten. It depends. So it depends very much on the products that are available and then what the activity is. So under those certificate schemes, particularly the VEU, an activity is essentially you are changing this from, so a ducted gas heating system to a reverse cycle air conditioner. That generates so many certificates, and that essentially dictates what the rebate is. When you're into larger plant, there's it really comes down to, is it a defined activity under that scheme?
So a couple of things there. I actually tried to get. I investigated getting some sort of subsidy for replacing my gas heater with a heat pump. I got nowhere with that and just spent full retail price on the heat pump. It was just easier because I couldn't get people calling me back. And there are a limited number of suppliers that I could find via the Victorian Government's website. So that the Victorian Government actually makes it very difficult to access some of the grants. The other things that you don't get for grants are doing things like upgrading the electrical infrastructure of your physical building if you live in a 60-year-old apartment. There is no money available for that, and I think for a lot of buildings that's just going to kill sustainability projects, particularly when you've got to get such a large proportion of the owners' corporation on board for these sorts of projects.
There was a New South Wales grant system that I can't remember the name of, but it was more advanced than the Victorian grants, and it did give more funding towards changeovers. So that has happened in New South Wales. It finished last year. As I said, I can't remember the name of it, but given that it's happened there's a chance that something might develop here. So that's one thing. The other comment about getting 75% of the people on board, I think the greatest problem, and what we're trying to address, is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're trying to produce a master plan or a retrofit plan that can put the same information in everybody's hands and explain the what needs to be done and the why. And when people understand the why, and they're hopefully all reading the document and understanding the same information, it should make decisions a little bit easier. I know 75% is still going to be a challenge, and for the reasons we all talked about, money is an issue. But if everybody does have the full amount of information, that's hopefully going to make things a little bit easier.
So Carla, Ying and I are all owner-occupiers in our flat, but it was interesting when we had an information session for all of our owners. Landlords were very enthusiastic to attend and then used all sorts of tricks to try and knock down the validity of sustainability, including, well, why would anybody need more than 25 amps of electricity for a flat? I could go on for 90 minutes about that.
I was just going to comment that at the other end of the spectrum, we've got some owner-occupiers who are desperate to get this work happening, and because they're under-informed, they're pushing and pushing and pushing for stuff to move and to see change, and we're actually hamstrung in a lot of ways. So we're doing our very best to move things along as quickly as possible, but you also see a lot of advertising, solar rebate here, solar rebate there, and so there isn't enough consistency, I think, across a lot of that messaging.
Actually, it's really interesting. So, there are lots of major barriers, and it sounds like we need state government to step in and help lift some of those barriers through through funding. But also, are there, Craig and Peter, maybe you can talk to this, are there buildings that are easier? Are there? I don't know. Is there?
We've done most of our work in new builds, so that's where our real experience is, and we're getting into this space now of existing builds. So we haven't got years and years of experience in this space. And as everyone said, Haynes Street is obviously difficult. Haynes Street, the core thing that I think Richard mentioned was that Haynes Street is predominantly when it was built, it was predominantly gas. So they didn't have a very large electrical capacity in the first place. So buildings built probably in the 80s onwards or 90s onwards may have less of an attachment to gas, and if they've got less of an attachment to gas, they may have higher electrical capacity, which would make changing over your appliances and your services to more simple. And also, the key thing is, depending on the shapes of buildings makes a big difference too. If you've got a very tall tower and you don't have a lot of roof space, but you've got a lot of apartments in there, solar is not going to generate that much power for you. But if you've got a 3-storey, low-rise spread building, solar is going to be much better for you. But solar is only going to be better for you if you've got enough electrical use within the building. So that's always the concern, that people may want to put too much solar in straight away, and if they're not using all the power they generate during the day, they then need to also get batteries. But if they, that's another significant expense. And there's lots of other interesting things happening too. There's vehicle to home charging is hopefully not too far away. I spoke to someone at the electric vehicle show late last year, and he was saying, look, he thinks it's still 2 years away, but the great hope is that the battery of your electric vehicle is going to be minimum 40 kilowatt capacity. It could go up to 80 kilowatt capacity. A home battery generally has capacity of about 10 to 13 kilowatts. So, from our point of view, things are happening in the next couple of years. If we get bi-directional charging and you can run your panels, your panels can generate electricity during the day. If cars are parked at home, you can be charging up these very large batteries that are part of your electric vehicle, and then that can be used at night time rather than sending it back to the grid. Where I'm heading to is that you've got to be careful not to put too much solar on the roof if you haven't got enough electrical use in your dwellings, in the total number of dwellings at the time that power is generated. If you're generating too much power during the day and you're not using enough power during the day, that power is going to be sent back to the grid. If you're lucky, there's a limit on how much can be exported to the grid during the day as well. So if you're putting a huge solar array on the roof and you're a predominantly gas building, you may run the risk of just wasting that energy. So you've got to think about your building form as well, and there's a lot to consider. What's the best thing for you to do in which sequence as well? Because sometimes you can get things out of sequence, and you may spend money on things that may not deliver a true benefit as quickly as you want.
Just coming back to the issue of gas, in 1963, gas would have been fantastic because the options would have been burning coal or burning wood to heat your home. I remember my mother's briquette heater. It was horrible. Gas was a big improvement. But all of this feels like it was a part of government policy in the 1960s. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that's the case. Now, that means government policy from 60 years ago is affecting what we do now. And it feels like there is a role for government in helping us to deal with the problems that it's created 60 years later.
Just in respect of the 75% special resolution, sitting outside the Strata Community Association Victoria, there's a couple of owners corporation managers as well. Not all works will require a special resolution. So that's a really important thing to understand. So I think you need to work with your OC manager to make sure of what the requirements are for voting. To your point, Sophie, yes, there are buildings that are easier than others. So I think when we're looking at things like transferring hot water to centralised hot water to electric, if it's already a centralised plant, that transition becomes easier because the infrastructure for water flow, the hydraulic, is already in existence. If you already have a main switchboard in your basement that make your car park distribution of electricity for EV charging simpler. The biggest challenge that most will find, and to the point about reverse sucking the power out of your car, that isn't a crazy statement. The buildings of the future will live in an environment where the building will understand the demand on it, it will suck the power out of the car, it will pay you for the power it's taken, it will then charge your car at a later time and charge you for doing that as well. They already exist. We look after Westside Place here in Melbourne, which is the old age site at 250 Spencer Street. It's 2,500 apartments. It's got 785 car parks. It's the largest private high voltage network building in the CBD. Every single car space has the capacity to install an EV charger, and the building has a load management solution to understand its power supply, and it has the capacity in DC situations in certain cars, Tesla won't let you do it, to suck the power back out if there's a demand and event in the building. These things exist already. Unfortunately, when you've come into a building that was built 8 years ago versus one that's going up now, the disappearance of gas by 2035 means that you need to look at the life cycle of your gas appliances and start making that transition now. Because you might have 8 years left in your gas, so you've got 8 years to start planning for how you convert that electricity. We'd all like to do it much earlier, but when you do face the fact that you might have 150 lots, 75% is hard to get. You may have to be looking at levies of $2,000-3,000 a lot in order to be able to fund this stuff. It takes a long time to build. So the really important thing is that you may not be doing it now, but you do need to start planning it now, because 10 years when you get to our age is not that far away.
Good point.
I like to say I'll either be retired or dead by the time it happens, but my staff keep telling me off for that. But yeah, it's a consideration.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Are there more questions there? Sorry, I didn't realise. Thank you.
Hi, I've got a question about hydronic heating. I've recently returned here from Germany where hydronic heating is the norm, and personally I prefer that type of heat to reverse cycle AC. And I've noticed that here, like developers like Nightingale are doing fossil-free buildings, and the heating that they're choosing to install is hydronic heating. I was wondering, is it an option for retrofitting apartments, or is it just too expensive because of all the plumbing, etc. required?
Did everyone hear that question? About hydronic heating and about retrofitting hydronic heating in apartments. Who would like to take that, Peter?
I'll have an initial go and then I can hand over to anyone else who's got thoughts. I'm a huge fan of hydronic heating. I used to live at the Commons, which was the sort of predecessor to the Nightingale buildings, and again, to the point about a good thermal envelope and then hydronic heating, I feel like that is in some respects the dream. The reality is it's quite hard to arrive at that dream unless you're starting with a new building. It is really challenging. One of the biggest challenges from a retrofit perspective is, and we haven't done this in apartments, so I sort of just want to be upfront about that, but we've certainly done it in a number of houses. If you're working with an existing hydronic distribution infrastructure, be that panels or in slab infrastructure, it's been sized to a flow temperature that is probably not going to be the same flow temperature provided by a heat pump. So it's possible, but you are potentially looking at needing to put more panels in to get the surface area from those panels to be able to distribute the requisite heat. Or you need to really understand and run some analysis on the building as to whether a lower supply temperature just operated for a longer period would still meet, I guess, the heating requirement of the building. So, I mean, I'm really sympathetic to the sort of desire and the appeal of hydronic heating, but it is challenging, and I'm just talking about standalone houses. So when you translate that to an apartment complex where you've got even bigger space constraints in terms of that heat pump and locating it somewhere and the infrastructure, it does present some pretty big challenges. I don't know if, Craig, you've got any comments on that?
Probably not a lot, but thanks, Peter. So I think probably the key part, it's all totally important and critical. And if you're building, is you're building the wall solid brick, or are they? Yeah, if they're solid brick, you probably don't have a cavity within your wall, so your pipes from your source of your water and moving the water around your hydronic units, you need to have pipes running all the way around the building, probably surface mounted on your walls. They've got to go around above your doorway to get from one heater to the next heater. So it's all starting to look a bit ugly and probably pretty hard to do. So if you've got a concrete slab floor, you may or may not have a ceiling space. If you've got a ceiling space, that starts to make things a little bit easier, but you've got to rely on the person below being happy for you to go into their apartment to put your pipes in as well. So there's the real functional sorts of things, which Peter said, and I guess I'm just expanding on that. So it's a bit of an ask, I would say, but worth looking on a case-by-case basis.
And I'll jump in here. There is a group out in the supplier showcase called All Electric Homes, and they are looking at retrofitting and hydronic heating solutions. So go and have a chat to them too. We've got
just on the sorry, Sophie. Just on the hydronic heating, there are hydronic heaters that are oil-based hydronic heaters that are heated up by electricity, but they're not as efficient. You don't get the coefficient of performance that you get from a refrigerant heat pump type system. So they're still taking 1 unit of energy and producing less than 1 unit of heat. And I'm sort of going back to the reverse cycle heat pump systems, which take 1 unit of energy and produce between 3 to 4 units of heat. So they're always going to be more efficient. As far as technologies go, they're the more efficient option still.
Yep.
And maybe you need to get more units if your electrical capacity if your building can handle the electrical capacity, or better position them, I suppose.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We've probably got time for one more question. Who wants to go next? And don't worry, there's plenty of time to chat after.
Hi. Oh, is that coming through right?
Yeah, can you just talk put your mouth almost on the microphone. Love the microphone.
I just wanted to have a quick comment about the lower temperature operations of heat pump systems. Like, I didn't want everyone to go away thinking they don't work under 0 degrees, because obviously there's a lot that are imported from Europe and the like. I used to work as basically heat pump specialist in the old Enviro shop in Northcote, so hopefully you can trust what I'm saying. But sand and heat pumps, which was like the #1 heat pump in Australia for numerous years, that works down to -10. Huge sales down in Tasmania. Mount them indoors, outdoors, in the protected area. I just did a double check on a split system for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. They work down to -20. So what happens is the coefficient of efficiency will drop back, but it's still the compressor action in the process that actually generates the heat. So worst case scenario is going to be working 1-to-1, and that you're still generating heat. But the main problem is if the unit's unhappy, it will just shut down to avoid freezing. But otherwise, yeah, just got to pick the right unit for your environment and your conditions. That's the key to that part of the process. So.
Brilliant. What a great way to end. Thank you. And it is always sad to end a discussion when it's in full swing, but we do have to draw a line. And what we say is we want to keep sharing. And if you've got stories to tell, we would love to hear about them. Just grab the QR code and share your sustainability story, success or challenge. And there'll be some case studies written up at the end of this. But I'd really like to thank our speakers. What a great talk, and I think we've all learnt a lot. I've learnt so much today, and I'd really like to thank Peter, Craig, Carla, Ying and Andrew. If we could all give them a round of applause. But as I said, you don't need to stop talking. I know that Peter at Goodbye Gas and Andrew at Active have stalls here, and if you would like to continue discussions, which I'm sure you will, with Carla, Richard and Ying about their conversion and their electrification journey, and also with Craig, have you not got a stall here? No, sorry, I didn't mean to shame you. Doesn't have a stall here. But out in the foyer, near where the SCA is, that's a kind of a meeting point to catch up. So I'd ask the speakers to go out there and you guys can continue discussing until the next session. So just remember that the experts are here, but they're also amongst you all. And today is about networking and finding your people. So I think that's really important. And we'd love for you to share your photos, your ideas, your reflections, and use the hashtag HighLifeExpo. So what's up next? Lots of things. Have a look at the program. We're starting again in here at 12:30. And I'd just like to say Nun Gujin. Thank you for coming and have an awesome day.